Hey guys, welcome back. Today I will be doing the second painting for my one reference photo and four mediums series. And just like the last time, I will only be talking about this process for this one. The full comparison will have its own video dedicated to it. So today I am doing it with gouache, and first of all, this is traditional gouache, which is very different from acrylic gouache, so keep that in mind. And I started off with just a light wash like I did with watercolors, but you can see that this first one didn't turn out to look as smooth as it did with my watercolors, just this first wash, and that's because I'm not really expecting any of this to show in the final piece. This is more of me just trying to tone the paper so it's less daunting for me to start the painting. I'm also starting to use a different process than my last painting and then most of my big gouache paintings. So for this one I didn't do an underpainting. Usually I start with using more watery consistency to just plan out what colors I want and try to figure out the composition for the painting. But for this one I completely skipped that part and just went straight ahead into using a very creamy, thick consistency, just adding a little bit of water to what came out of the tube. So this is more like what I do with my painting over my old sketches video series, and I'm doing that because there's not really that much planning I think that I needed for this piece. Just this reference photo is very simple, and I'm mostly just trying to use mostly the same colors that I see on the reference photo too. So with the colors and with the proportions, I'm just relying on what the reference photo looks like. I have to say that it's a bit more nerve-wracking to do it in this way because I don't really have an underpainting to guide me along the way. So I was just really laying down where I wanted the colors to be, not really worried about blending them out initially. And the great thing about gouache is that you can do that. You can leave them to dry and worry about blending them out later. I don't think I would have been able to do that as much with watercolors, and I definitely won't be able to do that with acrylics. So that's one great thing about gouache. The colors on this piece is a lot less straightforward than the watercolor one. I think it's because with the watercolors I have just the paper showing through and I'm basically just adding pigment to it. I don't really use a lot of white to turn up the values for my paint mixes. So it's a lot easier to say that I was just using mostly reds and greens for that piece, but for this one, it's a lot harder to explain. That being said, the colors on this one are leaning mostly toward looking more natural than my watercolor one. So for this one, I'm using more browns and reds instead, and in place of the greens that I used for the shadowed parts of her face, I am mostly just using grays. I don't know that it's a conscious decision, but it just felt more natural to use those colors for this one. With the gouache, the things that make it special, like how it reactivates, is also what makes it difficult to master, I think. Like on this case, after I have painted the lighter part, the lighter side of her face, as it usually does, this shadowed side started to look just not as dark as I initially wanted it to look. So then I had to lay down darker colors on top of already thick paint that I laid down before. So that's very hard because you risk just reactivating those layers underneath, and if you're not careful you can even scrub through into the paper. So you have to be very gentle when you're placing those layers on top. Color shifting is also one other thing that makes gouache really hard to paint with. So anytime your paint looks dark enough on the palette, when you lay it down on the paper, it just dries lighter, so it's very hard to paint those shadows on her face. So you really need to wait until the paints are dry to figure out what the next step is. I did do a test patch on the bottom, so it's basically just using the paint first on a different part of the same paper that you're painting with, so you'll see what it looks like when it dries. And that did help somewhat, but I just didn't remember to use it all the time. Being able to reactivate gouache after it dries, long after it dries, is great for times like when you're painting these freckles, because I would just dot them down and I wouldn't really need to worry about being fast when I'm mixing my colors. And with freckles, I had to make sure that I wasn't using the exact same colors with them, or else they'd look too uniform and unnatural. So mixing those colors takes time, and also mixing in general with gouache takes a lot longer than with watercolors. So it's great that you're able to go back to the paint that you've already laid down before. So like on this one, I was able to go back and soften up those edges and make them look not as dramatic as they do right now. But actually, speaking of that, I was really scared as I was painting her freckles that they would look just too much. And I was banking on her hair being darker, that it would do the same effect with the light side of her face suddenly making the shadowed side not dark enough. So I was hoping that her hair being darker would do the same thing to her freckles, and I think it did in a way. What I really did have problems with in this piece was painting her hair. I thought as I was painting it that it was just looking a little too cartoony and out of place for the piece, and I just really didn't have any idea why, because I really thought that this was how I had always painted hair, so I was really confused why it wasn't looking as I wanted it to look. So I kept trying to mix more natural looking colors instead of the brighter ones that I wanted to experiment with for a while, because I was thinking that it was that, but eventually I did figure out that it was because I had skipped the underpainting stage. And so because of that, the unnaturally bright color of the paper was just peeking through between the strands that I was painting. If I had the underpainting that was more closer to the colors of her hair, I wouldn't have noticed it that much, so I eventually figured it out. And so I filled in those gaps, but also I think I just grouped a lot of them together, because it was weird how I tried to individually paint them. It just wasn't the look that I had wanted. So after I figured that out, it was just a matter of painting putting in the finishing touches, and that was that. I do think she kind of looks like the Taylor in the All Too Well video with her red hair, and I didn't think that with my watercolor piece, so it's already interesting how both of these pictures turned out a little bit different from each other, even though I was using the same line work for both. But yeah, I can't wait to do the next video in the series. I think I'll be going with acrylics, but that is it for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I will be seeing you again soon.